The summer heat pressed down on the assembly area 3 miles south of St. Louis, France. It was July 26, 1944, and Staff Sergeant Frank Novak stood with his back against the warm metal hull of his Sherman tank, reading over a briefing that felt like staring at his own epitaph. The mathematics of it were brutal and unforgiving. A German Tiger could reach out and destroy his Sherman from over a mile away. The distance was almost incomprehensible, but Novak's 75mm gun, it had to close the gap down to just 300 yards, roughly 3 football fields squeezed onto a battlefield. And even then, the shells might bounce harmlessly off the Tiger's frontal armor. 2 days ago, a single Tiger had gutted 11 Allied tanks. 55 men lost. 55 individual stories ended in smoke and flame. The manual said to advance in formation, concentrate your fire, follow protocol. But Novak had worked in the Detroit arsenal where these Shermans were born. He understood what they could and couldn't do. That night, sketching angles in his notebook by lamplight, he recognized something the factory engineers and the brass had missed. Not a better weapon. Not thicker plating. Just a simple geometry problem. A problem that could flip 5-to-1 odds into something the Wehrmacht never anticipated. The Tiger's greatest advantage was about to become its most catastrophic liability. The morning of July 24th arrived cold and damp. The assembly area reeked of diesel exhaust and churned earth. Novak's breath formed small clouds as he leaned against the M4A1 side, watching the mist rise off the grass. Someone had stenciled Lucky Strike across the gun barrel in white paint, his loader's idea of a joke about their survival prospects. Novak didn't feel particularly fortunate. He felt drained. For 20 minutes he'd been wrestling with a letter to Rose, scratching out sentences, crumpling them, starting again. Nothing sounded right. How could he explain that after 3 weeks since Normandy, the hardship wasn't the combat? It was the endless waiting between moments of terror. They'd tackled German half-tracks on 2 separate occasions. They'd taken out a Panzer IV the previous week near the hedgerows. The Sherman had performed flawlessly, dependable, quick, adequate. We've got them outnumbered, he finally wrote, because it was factually true and because Rose needed to hold on to that belief while he was an ocean away. His crew moved through their morning preparations like a practiced dance. Jamie Walsh worked methodically on the gun breech, his movements deliberate and careful. The same way he'd worked back home in Iowa, treating every surface as though it were being prepared for a formal inspection rather than another potential encounter with death. The kid kept humming quietly, something that sounded like a church hymn. Jamie always hummed hymns when anxiety crept in. "Sarge, think we'll see anything today?" Jamie asked, still absorbed in his work. "Intelligence says the Germans are pulling back. Might stay calm today." Novak knew better, the way Captain Morrison had been pacing the command tent since pre-dawn, the peculiar silence on the radio frequencies over the past hour. Something significant was brewing. At 0700 hours, Battalion S2 summoned all tank commanders to the briefing tent. Novak crossed the muddy field alongside 11 other sergeants and officers, men who'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read danger in each other's expressions better than they could decipher words. The atmosphere was grim. No one was exchanging wisecracks. Morrison positioned himself beside a mapboard, his complexion ashen from lack of sleep. He'd served in North Africa. He'd witnessed firsthand what German armor could accomplish when positioned correctly with superior firepower backing it up. When he began speaking, his voice carried that flat, resigned tone of someone forced to deliver catastrophic news. "Gentlemen, we've got confirmation of a Tiger operating near Hill 192 in the hedgerow sector. Call sign Eisengeist, Iron Ghost. Intelligence attributes this machine to Oberleutnant Karl Brandt. He's racked up 47 confirmed kills since operations in Tunisia. This single tank has destroyed 11 Allied vehicles in the past 48 hours. 3 of those were Shermans." The tent became utterly silent except for raindrops beginning to tap against the canvas. Morrison pulled down a schematic comparison, the M4 Sherman positioned next to a Tiger technical diagram. Novak had examined these specifications before, back when they were cycling fresh crews through the Detroit production facilities. But studying them here, in a canvas tent just miles from where that Tiger waited with its crew, transformed those abstract numbers into concrete, terrifying reality. The M4's 75mm cannon achieves armor penetration of 68mm at 500 yards, Morrison explained, his tone remaining steady and clinical. The Tiger's frontal armor measures 100mm. The Tiger's 88mm gun penetrates our frontal armor at 2,000 yards. He paused, letting the arithmetic of their disadvantage sink deeply into every mind in that tent. You'll require point-blank range. Under 300 yards. Even then, you're looking at targeting the turret ring or lower hull sections. The odds aren't favorable. Novak performed the mental calculations he'd once used for production scheduling back in the arsenal. The Tiger could annihilate them from distances measured in miles. They had to compress that distance down to the length of 3 football fields, and even success would demand tremendous luck. He remembered the factory floor, Shermans rolling off the assembly line continuously. 5 tanks manufactured for every single German machine. 10 tanks, 20 tanks. The plant manager had stated it plainly. We cannot manufacture them equal to German designs, but we can produce 5 for every one they make. American manufacturing capacity against German craftsmanship. It played well in patriotic speeches. The calculus felt significantly different when you occupied the interior of one of those expendable tanks, designed and built with the understanding that you were essentially disposable. Jamie Walsh's hand went up. "Sir, what happens if we don't engage head-to-head?" Jamie asked. Morrison's jaw clenched noticeably. "You follow doctrine," the captain said flatly. "Doctrine says you suppress with smoke, advance in line, and concentrate fire." He dismissed them with a wave. The tank commanders filed out into the rain without speaking. Frank gathered his crew and looked hard at each face. Jamie had his Bible tucked under one arm like a talisman. Rodriguez was checking his watch, counting down to something. Chen was already calculating angles in his head, the way he always did before a fight. "If we do this by the book," Frank said quietly, "we're dead. But if we don't follow orders, we're court-martialed." He touched the letter in his breast pocket. Rosa's handwriting pressed through the fabric. He'd promised her he'd come home. Doctrine wasn't going to let that happen. Somewhere in the hedgerows, a German tank commander with 47 confirmed kills was waiting. Watching. Ready. July 25th, just after dawn. The American column moved through the hedgerows in perfect formation, exactly as the manual prescribed. 5 Shermans spaced 50 yards apart, mechanical precision. Frank's tank, Rawhide 2, held second position. Through the vision ports, Normandy looked like a green maze, each hedgerow 8 feet tall and thick enough to stop a truck. Visibility was maybe 50 yards on a good day. Radio static crackled. The column commander's voice broke through the noise. "Rawhide 2, this is Rawhide 1. Maintain 50-yard intervals, over." Frank keyed his microphone. "Rawhide 1, Rawhide 2. Roger that." Inside the Sherman, the air was thick with oil and sweat, and the sharp metallic smell of ammunition. 89 rounds for the 75mm gun, stacked carefully in racks around the turret and hull. 5 men moving in practiced rhythm, driver and assistant driver in the front, Frank in the commander's cupola. Jamie at the gun, their loader ready to feed rounds. The M4A1 could do 30 miles per hour on roads, 15 cross-country. 51mm of frontal armor, 38 on the sides. Frank had memorized these numbers back in Detroit, specifications that seemed almost adequate until you learned what they were adequate against. The lead Sherman, Rawhide 1, rounded a corner at 8:22 hours. The sound came first. Sharp. Not like artillery, faster, cleaner. High-velocity German engineering, traveling at 2,657 feet per second. Then the explosion. Rawhide 1 ceased to exist as anything but twisted metal and flame. The 88mm round punched through the front glacis plate like it was paper. The Sherman brewed up instantly, flames shooting 30 feet into the morning air as ammunition cooked off inside. Frank's throat went dry. Halt. Reverse. But Rawhide 3 was already pushing forward, the commander following doctrine. Frank never even saw where the Tiger was positioned. Just the result. Another crack, another Sherman hit in the turret at 1,600 yards. The explosion ripped the turret clean off its ring. 3 crew killed instantly, 2 more bailed out, uniforms burning, screaming into the smoke. "Get us back!" Frank hammered his fist against the driver's shoulder. The Sherman lurched into reverse, engine roaring as they backed into a sunken lane. Through the vision port, Frank searched for the Tiger. Nothing, just smoke and hedgerows and the burning hulks of 2 American tanks. Jamie's voice was shaking. "Sarge, I can't see it. Where is it? I don't know." Frank's hands trembled on the radio handset. They couldn't see the Tiger, couldn't hit what they couldn't see. Running would expose their thinner side armor, 38 millimeters of vulnerability. 800 meters away, Oberleutnant Karl Brent stood in his commander's cupola, watching through his binoculars. The Zeiss optics were crystal clear at this range, German precision engineering that turned distant targets into shooting gallery ducks. He'd positioned the Tiger in the shadow of a thick hedgerow, hull down. Only the turret was exposed, but the fields of fire were perfect. Clear sight lines down 3 separate approach lanes. "Target," he said calmly into his throat mic. "Panzerfeind, 1,600 meters." His gunner acknowledged, already adjusting for range and wind. The 88mm KWK gun was a masterpiece. Nearly 3,000 feet per second muzzle velocity, flat trajectory, devastating penetration. Time to target at this range was 1.8 seconds. The American crews probably never knew what hit them. Karl pressed the firing button. Crack. Through his optics, he watched the tracer arc across the distance, watched the impact, watched another Sherman erupt in flames. Clean kill. Professional. Exactly as he'd been trained at the Panzer School. "Reload," he ordered his loader Schmidt, who was already moving with mechanical precision. German crew drill perfected through hundreds of hours of practice. But Karl was counting in his head. 2 kills, 4 rounds expended, 32 remaining. Each round was precious now, with supply lines collapsing, and the Americans pushing deeper into France every day. Schmidt's voice came through the intercom, young and eager. "Herr Oberleutnant, is it true what they say? 1 Tiger equals 10 Shermans?" Karl watched the 3rd burning Sherman through his optics. 3 American crews dead in 4 minutes. 15 men who'd woken up this morning thinking they'd see tomorrow. "The propaganda says 1 Tiger is invincible," Karl replied quietly. "The truth is simpler. German engineering plus good ground equals advantage. But advantages run out." He tapped the fuel gauge. "Less than half a tank remaining." "They keep coming, Schmidt. They all keep coming." In the sunken lane, Frank pressed his back against the turret wall, breathing hard. His crew was silent. Jamie's hands were shaking on the gun controls. Through the radio, Frank could hear other units calling for support, reporting contact, requesting permission to withdraw. "We can't fight that," Jamie whispered. Frank pulled out his map, studying the hedgerow geometry, the angles and distances and approach routes. His mind was already working the problem the way he used to work production bottlenecks back in Detroit. There had to be a solution. There was always a solution. You just had to change the math. That night, unable to sleep, Frank sat in his tent with a notebook open on his knees, sketching by flashlight. Not the frontal attack doctrine demanded, but something else entirely. The Tiger was strong frontally, but it was also stationary. Shermans were fast. What if 3 tanks came from different angles simultaneously? What if instead of feeding the Tiger targets one at a time, they forced it to choose? He drew lines on the paper, calculating speeds and distances. The M4 could do 30 miles per hour on roads. The Tiger's turret traverse was slow, 60 seconds for a full rotation manually, 30 with powered traverse. If 3 Shermans approached from different directions at the same time, the Tiger couldn't face all of them at once. It was geometry. Simple math. The kind of problem Frank used to solve on the factory floor when production lines bottlenecked. At 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep entirely and walked to battalion headquarters. Captain Morrison was still awake, sitting at a field desk with casualty reports spread in front of him. The oil lamp cast deep shadows across his face. "Sir, I need 5 minutes," Frank said. Morrison looked up, exhausted. "Sergeant Novak, it's 3 in the morning. I know, sir, but I think I know how to kill that Tiger." Morrison gestured at the empty chair. Frank sat and spread his sketches on the desk, talking fast. One Sherman pins frontally with smoke while two others flank from different angles. Change the geometry. Turn the Tiger's strength into a liability. The Tiger's side armor is only 80 millimeters, Frank explained. Our 75 can penetrate that at 800 yards if we come at him from 3 directions at once. He can't rotate fast enough to engage all of us. We just need to change the math from 1 Tiger shoots 5 Shermans one at a time to 1 Tiger gets surrounded. Morrison studied the sketches, his expression unreadable. That's not doctrine, Sergeant. You break formation, you lose coordination, you'll get lost in the hedgerows. Crossfire. Frank pulled out more detailed diagrams, road positions, timing sequences, radio call procedures. Sir, I built these things in Detroit. I know what they can do. The M4 does 30 miles per hour on roads. We can reposition faster than he can rotate that 56-ton turret. We just need speed and angles. If you're wrong, Morrison said slowly, if one of those Shermans gets lost in the bocage, or the timing's off by 30 seconds, then we're no worse off than we are now. Right now, doctrine says we advance in line and die in line. This way, at least, we're making him choose which direction to face. Morrison sat back, rubbing his eyes. Frank could see him calculating not just tactical odds, but political ones. Career-ending decisions. The weight of command that meant every choice could put names on casualty reports. You get one chance, Morrison finally said. 3 tanks. Rahide 2, Rahide 4, Rahide 5. Synchronized attack at 0600 tomorrow. If you're wrong, Sergeant, those 9 men are on you. Frank found Lieutenant Chen and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in their tents an hour before dawn. Chen was already awake, cleaning his sidearm by candlelight. Rodriguez was writing a letter home, probably to his wife and 4 daughters back in Texas. Frank spread his sketches on Rodriguez's footlocker and walked them through the plan. We're calling it Texas two-step, Frank said. Miguel, you advance frontally, lay smoke at 1,200 yards. David and I flank from parallel routes at full speed. We hit him from 3 directions within 60 seconds of each other. He can only face one direction at a time. Chen studied the sketches, his finger tracing the approach routes. Timing has to be perfect. If one of us arrives early, the Tiger picks us off before the others get there. That's why we synchronize watches and use radio time hacks every 30 seconds, Frank said. We stay coordinated. Rodriguez looked at Frank with the calm steadiness of a man who'd survived 3 beach landings. If Morrison's right, if we get tangled up in the hedgerows and lose coordination, then we improvise. But Miguel, you've got 4 daughters waiting for you. You really want to drive straight at that 88 and hope doctrine works this time? Rodriguez folded his letter and tucked it into his breast pocket. No, I don't. They planned through the rest of the night, radio frequencies, timing marks, fallback positions, fields of fire. Jamie sat quietly in the corner, sketching the plan in the margin of his Bible. 3 small Shermans surrounding 1 larger tank. The impossible geometry that might just save their lives. 800 meters away, Carl Brent stood in his commander's cupola, watching the pre-dawn darkness through his binoculars. He'd noticed something the day before. American patrols probing 3 different approach routes instead of 1. They were learning. Adapting. They're getting smarter, he told Schmidt. That makes them more dangerous. But the Tiger was low on fuel now, 36 gallons remaining, barely enough for 20 miles of movement. Carl could reposition once, maybe twice more, before he'd be fixed in place. The advantage was narrowing. The trap was becoming a cage. July 26th, 5:55 hours. Frank stood beside Lucky Strike, watching his crew load the 75mm gun. 89 rounds ready. Engine idling. Jamie was pale but steady, his hands no longer shaking. Frank keyed his radio. Rahide 4, Rahide 5, this is Rahide 2. Remember speed and angles. Hit him where he ain't looking. Execute at 0600 hours. 3 Shermans advanced on 3 different hedgerow lanes, engines roaring, converging on the Tiger's suspected position like the points of a closing triangle. Frank gripped the turret rail as Lucky Strike bounced over rutted farm roads at 28 miles per hour, faster than doctrine ever recommended through bulkage terrain. The entire plan depended on speed and timing. Arrive too early and the tiger picks you off alone. Arrive too late and your buddies are already burning. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio at 0600 exactly. Rahida 2, Rahida 4, this is Rahida 5, commencing frontal approach, laying smoke now. Through his commander's cupola, Frank couldn't see Rodriguez's Sherman, but he could imagine it advancing straight down the main lane while the gunner pumped white phosphorus rounds downrange at 1200 yards. Thick smoke was billowing across the Tiger's position now, obscuring those perfect Zeiss optics that Carl Brent relied on. 0602. Frank heard the Tiger fire, that distinctive crack of the 88. Then Rodriguez's calm voice came back. Rahida 5 missed wide by 15 feet. Continuing advance, Carl was firing blind through smoke now, his greatest advantage neutralized. Frank checked his watch. 45 seconds until they reached flanking position. Driver maintained speed. Gunner, prepare for target left, 600 yards. Jamie's voice came back steady. Ready, Sarge. 0603. Carl's voice cut through his intercom inside the Tiger, sharp with recognition. They're flanking. Driver pivot right. But the Tiger weighed 56 tons, and soft Norman soil wasn't parade ground concrete. The massive tank began its turn sluggishly, treads chewing mud, turret rotating to meet the new threat. 0604. Lucky Strike burst through a gap in the hedgerow at 600 yards, perfect side angle on the Tiger's hull. Frank saw it clearly now for the first time, the angular armor. The long 88 barrel swinging toward them, the German cross painted on the turret. For one crystalline second, he understood what his factory floor calculations had missed. This wasn't just a machine, it was 56 tons of predatory intention. Target Panzer, side, 600 yards, Jamie shouted. Fire! The 75mm gun bucked, the breech slamming backward as the armor-piercing round screamed downrange. Frank watched through his optics as the round struck the Tiger's side hull, exactly where the ammunition storage was. Boom! Sparks flew. Metal shrieked. But the smoke cleared, and the Tiger was still moving, still fighting. 80mm of side armor had held. Reload, reload. But Carl's turret was swinging toward them now, that massive 88 tracking Lucky Strike, like a predator's eye. Frank had maybe 3 seconds before. The sound came from the wrong direction. Chen's Sherman, Rawhide 4, had materialized at 500 yards from the opposite flank, exactly as planned. His 75mm round caught the Tiger at the turret ring, where armor thinned to 60mm. The impact sent shrapnel ricocheting inside the turret. Through his optics, Frank saw the Tiger's main gun stop rotating mid-traverse, jammed. Carl understood immediately what had happened, saying they'd changed the geometry on him, turned his strength into liability. He couldn't rotate the gun to engage Frank, couldn't pivot the hull fast enough to face Chen. And Rodriguez was pushing through the smoke now at 400 yards. A third angle of attack. Abandon tank, Carl's order cut through the German intercom with the finality of a man who knew when mathematics had turned against him. Rodriguez, Chen, and Frank poured fire into the Tiger's rear armor. 3 Shermans, 9 rounds in 15 seconds, overwhelming the German tank with volume and angles. 1 round punched through the engine deck, fuel ignited, flames erupted from the Tiger's engine compartment. Black smoke boiled into the morning sky. The German crew bailed out through the hatches, hands raised, uniforms smeared with oil and smoke. Carl was the last out, standing beside his burning tank, watching 3 Shermans surround the machine that propaganda had called invincible. His hands were raised, but his face was calm. An engineer watching an elegant solution to a problem he'd believed had no answer. Frank ordered his driver forward, gun trained on the German crew. 50 yards separated them now, close enough to see Carl Brent clearly, older than Frank expected, maybe 32, with the bearing of a man who understood exactly what had just happened. 5 years of propaganda had told Carl that 1 Tiger equaled 10 Shermans, but 3 had just killed his invincible machine, not by being better, by being smarter. Frank was about to order his crew to dismount and secure prisoners when battalion radio crackled with Captain Morrison's voice, urgent and strained. All Rahida units, Tiger contact at Grid Quebec 7-4, requesting immediate support. Rahida 6 and Rahida 7 destroyed, multiple casualties. Rahida 2, you're the closest unit. How copy? Frank's hand froze on the radio handset. Another Tiger, 2 miles east, more Shermans burning, more crews dying. He looked at his fuel gauge, half tank remaining, ammunition counter showed 71 rounds. His crew was exhausted, hands still shaking from adrenaline, but American tankers were dying while he sat here. He looked at Carl Brent one more time, the enemy engineer who had built death machines but now understood the mathematics of defeat. In that moment, Frank made a choice that would change everything. He dropped from the turret and walked to Carl with his sidearm drawn but pointed at the ground. In broken German, he asked, "We feel a tiger?" "How many tigers?" Carl looked at him, really looked at him, then answered in accented English, "2 more. Maybe 3. You cannot face them alone." Frank holstered his sidearm and turned to Rodriguez. "Miguel, secure these prisoners with the infantry support. David, you're with me." Then he looked back at Carl. "You're coming with us. You're going to tell us how to kill them." Jamie's eyes went wide. "Sarge, we can't—" "We can and we will," Frank said. "Those are American crews dying right now. If he knows Tiger weaknesses, we're using that intel." Frank pulled out zip ties from his field kit. "Hands out, Oberleutnant." Carl extended his wrists without protest as Frank secured them. Carl spoke quietly. "You understand what you are asking? For me to betray my own tactics?" "I understand," Frank said. "I've got maybe 15 minutes before more of my guys burn to death in machines that can't protect them. You've got a choice. You can sit here and be a prisoner, or you can help us fight intelligently instead of stupidly. Your call." Carl looked at his burning Tiger, at Schmidt and the other crew members being guarded by American infantry, at the 3 Shermans that had just executed a flanking maneuver he'd never anticipated. Then he nodded once. "I will help, but not because I betray Germany, because watching brave men die from bad doctrine, American or German, is not engineering. It is murder." They raced toward Grid Quebec 7-4 at 25 miles per hour. Carl sitting in the tank commander's position beside Frank, hands zip-tied. Jamie's sidearm trained on him from the gunner's seat. Chen's Sherman followed 50 yards behind. The ride was loud, engine roaring, treads clanking, radio chatter crackling with frantic contact reports from the engagement ahead. Carl leaned close to Frank's map, studying the terrain. The Tiger will position hulled down with overlapping fields of fire. Side armor is only 80 millimeters. You can penetrate at 800 yards if you hit clean. Turret traverses are our weakness. 30 seconds for full rotation with power, 60 without. He tapped coordinates on the map. "If I were commanding that Tiger, I would be here. High ground, 3 approach lanes, hedgerow concealment." "Why are you helping us?" Frank asked, not looking away from the map. Carl was quiet for a moment, watching the Norman countryside blur past through the vision port. "Because this," he gestured at the burning fields, the destroyed tanks they passed, the smoke rising from a dozen different fires. "This is not what I studied engineering to create. I wanted to build bridges, cranes, things that lifted civilization. Instead, I built this war. And your doctrine, sending brave men straight into 88mm guns because a manual says so. That is as much an engineering failure as any mechanical flaw." At 07:15, they reached the engagement zone. Rahida 6 was a smoking wreck in a field, turret blown clean off. Rahida 7 was damaged but mobile, backing away from an unseen enemy position. Frank grabbed the radio. "Rahida 7, this is Rahida 2. Execute Texas 2-step. I'll pin frontally with smoke. You flank from the east access road." "How copy?" The response came back shaky but willing. "Rahida 2, Rahida 7, copy Texas 2-step. Standing by." Carl provided ranges and angles as they advanced. His voice calm and precise, like he was teaching a university lecture instead of helping kill his own countrymen's equipment. 1,200 meters. Load smoke. When you fire, he will rotate toward the threat. That gives your flanker 45 seconds before the turret can engage the new angle. Frank ordered the smoke rounds. White phosphorus bloomed across the Tiger's position, obscuring vision just as it had with Karl's own tank hours earlier. Then Frank pushed Lucky Strike forward aggressively, drawing the Tiger's attention while Chen and Rahide 7 raced down parallel routes at maximum speed. The attack unfolded exactly as planned. Frank pinned frontally. Rahide 7 flanked from the east at 30 miles per hour, struck the Tiger's rear armor at 550 yards. 3 quick shots. Engine kill. The German crew bailed immediately, hands raised, recognizing the same tactical defeat Karl had experienced. As MPs arrived to secure the second Tiger's crew, a new tank rolled into the clearing. Different silhouette, longer gun barrel, a Sherman Firefly from the British 7th Armoured Division. The commander, Lieutenant Powell, dismounted and surveyed the scene with a grin. Bloody brilliant flanking yank. Powell patted his Firefly's 17-pounder gun. But next week, you won't need the fancy footwork. This gun can kill a Tiger frontally at 1,000 yards. One shot straight through. We're mass-producing them now. Frank looked at the long 17-pounder, then at Karl. Karl nodded slowly, understanding immediately. So the trick becomes standard. That is how wars are won. One good idea becomes doctrine. As MPs led Karl away, the German officer turned back. "Sergeant Novak, your factory." "You said Detroit." "Yes," Frank replied. "My factory was Henschel in Kassel. We both built machines of war. Perhaps after this." He didn't finish, but Frank understood. Frank extended his hand. They shook briefly, formally. 2 engineers who'd spent the morning rewriting the mathematics of survival. Jamie watched, his Bible still tucked under his arm, understanding that sometimes dignity mattered more than propaganda, even in defeat. 3 months later, Frank's Texas 2-step flanking tactic appeared in official U.S. Armored Forces doctrine. Sherman Firefly production reached 600 units by September. Tigers were no longer invincible, just targets with known vulnerabilities. In November, Frank received a letter from the Red Cross. Karl Brent was alive in a POW camp in England, teaching Allied interrogators about German tank design. The letter included a sketch. 2 engineers building something other than weapons. A bridge, a crane. Anything but death. Frank sat in his tent that evening, writing to Rosa. "Today I learned something the propaganda never taught. Wars aren't won by the best machines, but by the best thinking. And sometimes even enemies can teach you how to win." He looked at Jamie's Bible sketch of 3 Shermans surrounding 1 Tiger, the impossible geometry that had changed everything. And finally, the math made sense.